So today I'm going to talk about enlightenment and delusion. And I sent out an email to the Sangha that said those who came to the talk that enlightenment was guaranteed. So I guess you're the only ones who really know. So by the time I finish my talk, you'll all be enlightened. Zen is based on the enlightenment of the Buddha and on the enlightenment of the successive ancestors and Zen masters. I mean, without their enlightenment, we would be something else. Yeah. And if you don't know, what the enlightenment of the Buddha is, then you don't know the foundations of our practice. But as with, we've said many times, it's easier to say what it's not than it is to say what it is. Because as soon as we say what it is, then that doesn't really reach it. It limits it because it's boundless. However, we can point to the finger that's pointing to the moon. And that's what we're going to do. Now, when the Buddha became enlightened, and it says in the Avatamsaka Sutra, which is also known as the Flower Ornament Sutra, how wonderful, how wonderful. Everyone, without exception, has the wisdom and virtue of the Buddha. It's only because of their attachments and deluded thoughts that they don't realize it. So, we are all enlightened, but we don't realize it because we put up all kinds of barriers. And the Buddha mentions attachments and deluded thoughts in particular as barriers to realizing Buddhahood. So I'm going to talk a little bit about those and then how we can let them go. Master Obaku, who was the teacher of Master Rinzai, said something very similar to the Buddha. He said there's no distinction between the Buddha and sentient beings, but that sentient beings are attached to forms and so seek externally for Buddhahood, and by their very seeking they lose it. Even though they do their utmost for a full eon, they will not be able to attain it. They do not know that if they put a stop to conceptual thought and forget their anxiety, the Buddha will appear before them, for this mind is the Buddha, and the Buddha is all living things. So he says that most people don't know that if they put a stop to conceptual thought and forget their anxiety, the Buddha will appear before them. So that's what we say over and over again. And that's why we meditate, to quiet our mind and put a stop to conceptual thought. So the Buddha mentions deluded thoughts. And what are deluded thoughts? For me, they're synonymous with dualistic thoughts, dichotomous thoughts, where you create opposing values, opposing awareness. So in the affirming faith and mind, which we chant during Shishin, it explains how these thoughts and opinions keep us from the subtle source, which is the essential truth of all of our life. It was written by the third patriarch in China, and he said, "Don't seek for the truth, just cease to cherish your opinions. You know, that's what we say over and over again, what the Buddha was saying, what Obaku said, what we chanted. The Gatha on opening the sutra. That the sun of enlightenment is always shining, but we obscure it with the dark clouds of illusion, delusion. And if we let go, those clouds will part and the sun will shine. Now, the basis of these deluded or dualistic thoughts is belief in a unique, separate self that abides. Because we separate everything according to what promotes that self and what threatens or denigrates that self. And so we separate everything. And we're trying to protect that self. That one of the teachings of the Buddha is that self is something that we create in our own mind. So if we can clearly see that, then the source of our dualistic thoughts will dissolve. So I'm going to mention a bunch of stories about that illustrate dualistic thoughts, and then how we can, and an antidote to some of them. So an ancient philosopher once visited the tyrant of Syracuse in Sicily. And the tyrant told him all about his plans for the future, his schemes and projected conquests, and finally said to the philosopher, "After all this has been accomplished, after I have built a city, declared war on Messina as well as on other countries, and have conquered them all, then I'll settle down and be happy." And the philosopher said, "Why don't you settle down now and be happy?" What's preventing us from settling down right now and being happy? There's this classic character in Sufi literature called Nasruddin. And he was talking to friends in a cafe. And he said he was looking for the perfect woman to marry. And in Cairo he met one who was beautiful, but then when they were discussing things she wasn't so intelligent, so she wasn't the one. And then in Baghdad he met one who was so intelligent, but he wasn't really physically attracted to her, so she wasn't the one. But in Beirut he met the perfect woman. And his friend said, "Well, why didn't you marry her?" And he said, "It seems she was looking for the perfect man." So always, we set things aside that prevent us from being happy.